Hey guys, welcome back to Demystifying Economy with Neha Bolgam at Sosan Classes. The topic of discussion for today's video is issues related to planning in India, and as announced in our previous week's Monetary Policy Committee video, this topic is quite diverse and broad, and for that let me give you the structure of how the video discussion for today is going to go about. I will start by discussing what planning is, what do you define and what do you mean by planning, what are the types of planning, the scope of planning currently in the year 2020, and what are the bodies that are associated with planning in India, what are the works that are going on under planning, and what is the way forward. So come learn with me. Before jumping into understanding what planning means and etc., let us try and look at what are the overall types of planning in any economy per se. So generally planning is divided into economic planning, social planning, political planning, and etc. But since our series is based upon demystifying economy, as I told you, the focus is about the introduction of economic planning. And to make you guys understand planning in layman terms, it is an economic mechanism or just a mechanism for resource allocation. Now this is the key word here, and this resource allocation will lead to decision making via planning. Now what is the need for understanding what the resources in the country are, where they are located, and that leading to decision making? So the need here is the question mark, and the need is always that the resources, which we've all learned in our high school and etc., is that resources are always a limited source. May that be human resources or natural resources, there is the need for them to be planned, allocated properly and executed. And coming to economic planning, it is nothing but the directing or planning of the economic activity outside the mechanisms of the market. And when the markets are included, we have two types of planning that the economy needs to focus on. One is the microeconomic planning, and second is the macroeconomic planning. Again, to explain this to you in simple terms, microeconomic planning induces activities such as production, distribution, consumption, etc., whereas macroeconomics includes investments at national level, distributions, and etc. Going ahead, we have to understand that economic planning has been going on since the independence and even before that, but after independence it has come into the hands of our own, and this economic planning alone can be highlighted as to be playing a major role in the development of the country and had led the country to become self-sufficient that we are today. Now going ahead into understanding the crux of today's video series is about the issues that need to be addressed in planning the Indian economy. Apart from the main objectives that planning in India has, that is to enable growth and to monitor the judicious use of resources, we also have some primary problems that are ailing the country, such as overpopulation. Now, I would like to always start the conceptual theories in the Demystifying Economy series to be very basic so that everyone would understand the grassroots problems that are going on with the economy. Overpopulation is, I think, the glaring problem that India currently has, and as everyone knows, we are the world's second country competing with China, which we are soon going to overtake. And after overpopulation, the second major problem in planning comes with the food scarcity. Now, though there is the food production has increased after the Green Revolution and other technology-induced production boosts that we have, the food scarcity is majorly because of the lack of coordination between the production, the distribution, and the consumption patterns. Going ahead, we also have health, which is one of the basic glaring gap that is going on in the planning of India and is all the more highlighted now with the pandemic situation. Further, we have the vulnerable sections of the community. Under the vulnerable sections of the community, it always not necessarily means the socially and economically backward SC, ST populations, but also the socially backward, such as the PWD, the women, children, and elderly people. Going ahead, We also have another basic issue, that is infrastructure. Now, as most of you must be knowing, under the BJP government, the major focus which our respected Prime Minister Modi keeps talking about is the building of infrastructure, which will lead to higher investments in the country. And under infrastructure, there are myriad topics that we have, such as transport, communication, energy, water. We also have the air quality and trade and investments. After the infrastructure, we also have, last but not the least, on which all these pillars of planning depend upon for growth, is the governance, which induces peace and security to its citizens. Now, having understood the several ills in the society, or the issues that are plaguing the planning in Indian society, let's go forward and understand what is the economic development planning process. It is always very important to understand what are the issues that are plaguing the economy, and also all the more important to understand what is the planning process, what are the methods of planning, for which as a bureaucrat, you understand how you can chip in your effort into eradicating these problems and bringing in a better situation. Now, any planning process firstly includes the economic assessment of the industry clusters and then the competitive assets within the economy, while ensuring that we do not have any NPAs or any debts majorly, that is external and internal. And then after the assessment of all these, we go into the strategy and action plan, which leads to the visioning and asset mapping, and then we get into the public input and perception. Now, what happens is majorly all the countries and the governments across the world always succeed in following all the first 5 steps of the economic planning process, while the public input and perception, being the most important, is always mostly edited out. Now, this is where we all have to carefully include that assessing the micro and macro situations in the country, the public perception is always important because that gives the grassroots view. Thus, ensuring that we understand the importance of public input and perception in the planning process of an economy, let us, assessing the micro and macro situations in a country, let us understand what is the current scope of planning that is going on in India. The scope of planning always majorly includes plans that are going on according to the current economic situations in a country and what are the future aims and goals. On those lines, I would like to introduce that the government on 12th May 2020, our Prime Minister has raised a clarion call to the nation, giving a kickstart to the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, that is the Self-Reliant India campaign, and announced the special economic and comprehensive package of INR 20 lakh crores, that is equivalent to almost 10% of India's GDP. And the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan has been announced in 2020, especially keeping the COVID and the pandemic situation in mind. And the aim is to make the country and its citizens independent and self-reliant in all senses. So the key terms here to remember are self-reliance. He further outlined 5 pillars of Atmanirbhar Bharat, such as the economy, where we take quantum jumps, as until now the focus has always been upon incremental changes, which has not worked quite very well for the Indian economy. As you see, the India and the Chinese economies have almost got independence around the same time, but the planning of the nations and the executive of their actions show the glaring difference in the annual GDP targets that are achieved by each of the nations. So now the economy's focus has been shifted into quantum lumps. And then the second pillar being infrastructure, that represents modern India with world-class technology. And then increasing the system and the governance with, again, technology driven. As you know, India is the largest democracy in the world and also has the largest demography, with most percentage of the demography being in the youth, which is the age that is the age that can always put quite well into job and creativity and entrepreneurship. That is, to the full utilization of power of demand and supply to boost the economic activities in the economy. So, understanding the scope of planning through Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, that is India focusing on becoming self-reliant, announced by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi to reboot or revive the economy from the ongoing recession, also falls in line with our recent walking out of the RCEP, that is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as mentioned also by the Foreign Ministry of the government, that we walking away from the multilateral investments and global cooperation doesn't mean that we are shunning away from bilateral relations and global partnerships, but it means that the scope of the planning for the economy for India from 2020 is going to be more oriented towards regional development and being self-dependent. On those lines, I would like to mention this saying here that Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is a chance for Indian startups to take charge of the innovation for which we usually depend on global suppliers. This says enough. And to just give you a taste of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan's reforms taken by the government are quite bold, such as the supply chain reforms for agriculture. We also have the rational tax reforms and simple and clear laws, introducing schemes that are oriented towards human resource and natural resources viability and judicious use. Now, having understood what planning means, what are its types, and what is the current going on scope for planning in India and its future plans, let us get a bit into the history and understanding of how planning and its bodies evolved in India. First systematic work came into existence in the year 1934, when the renowned engineer and statesman M. Visvesvaraya formulated the 10-year plan for the economic development of the country in his book Planned Economy for India. While this being in theory, planning was first initiated in India again in 1938 by the Congress President and Indian National Army Supreme Leader Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, later on again by Nehru, who was made the chief of the National Planning Commission. And next, in the year 1944 is a year of major events related to planning, which where such concepts like Bombay planning by the eminent industrialists like J.R.D. Tata and etc. have come up, and later we also have the Gandhian plan also being brought up in the year 1944 by S.N. Agarwal, aimed at setting up decentralized economy on Gandhian ideas such as self-sufficient villages, cottage industries and etc. Later, the year 1950 is the year of prominence where the Planning Commission of India had developed the 12 5-year plans. And this Planning Commission has functioned under the guidance of the National Development Council that was set up in the year 1952. The National Development Council represented and comprised of states and union territories to which the Planning Commission had to report. While formulating policies, they always followed the top-down approach by looking at the perspectives of the nation as a whole and then trickling it down to the respective states. While now, currently, in 2015, NITIAayog has come in place, replacing the Planning Commission, and NITIAayog, where NITI stands for the National Institute for Transforming India. This has taken up the policy initiatives for the union and state governments to work upon. It did not, again remember, the major difference is that it does not have any 5-year plans and was governed by a governing council rather than the National Development Council as under the Planning Commission. NITIAayog was developed for being a think tank for the government. It chose to consult the states at the stage of policy formulation rather than waiting till the time of allocation of funds, and then developed the indicative policies and planning accordingly. So the major aspect to remember here is that there is the consultation of states. The governing council to which the NITIAayog had to report comprised of the states and central government and all the stakeholders, including like NITIAayog experts, union government and state governments, representatives to participate in the meeting with equal say. One interesting thing is that NITIAayog does not possess any power to allocate funds to the states and ministries and follows the bottom-up approach as opposed to the centralized one followed by the Planning Commission. Understanding the evolution of the planning and its bodies in India, let us focus on Planning Commission and NITIAayog and understand the differences between these two bodies in a comparative approach as given in the table that is following. So under Planning Commission, it enjoyed the powers to allocate funds to the ministries and state governments, while NITIAayog is just an advisory body or a think tank, and it does not have the powers to allocate funds, but rather this has been vested to the Finance Ministry. And under Planning Commission, the last commission had 8 full-time members, while the number of full-time members could be fewer than that of the Planning Commission. So here the full-time members have reduced. Now the state's role was always limited to the National Development Council and only during the annual interaction plan meetings, while the state governments are expected to play a more significant role than they did in the Planning Commission with the NITIAayog. And here the secretaries or member secretaries were appointed through the usual process, while under NITIAayog they will be appointed by the Prime Minister. And here the secretaries came to be known as the CEO. The full Planning Commission had no provision for part-time members, while this has a provision for part-time members depending on the need. So here when it comes to membership, there are two novel things that the full-time members has been reduced and part-time members have been increased based on the gig economy to keep the creativity and the ideas flowing. The Commission report to National Development Council that had state chief ministers and lieutenant governors, while the Governing Council has state chief ministers and lieutenant governors as well. Now the Planning Commission had deputy chairperson, a member secretary and full-time members, while NITIAayog has a number of new posts as I have just mentioned above, that is the CEO of the secretary rank and the vice chairperson. Now these will also have full-time members and 2 part-time members. 4 cabinet members will serve as the ex officio members, now this being the composition of the NITIAayog. Planning Commission was formed by the Commission and states were consulted about allocation of the funds. So here it is very important that states were consulted while making the policy and deciding on the funding allocations, and the policy would only be a result after that. The Planning Commission had power to decide allocation of government funds for various programs at the national and state levels. And coming to the most important part is, as I've just discussed, that the allocation of funds will always be based on consultation, and then Planning Commission has the power to decide the allocation of government funds, while NITIAayog does not have the power to allocate funds, which, as I've just told you, is given to the Finance Ministry. And Planning Commission has imposed policies on states and tied allocation of funds with projects with it, while NITIAayog does not have the power to impose policies. Now, before going ahead and discussing about the issues with planning and the planning bodies, let me just highlight again the new features that have come into place with NITIAayog, that it is going to be an advisory body and the state governments are expected to play more role. There are new posts, and the NITIAayog has the monitoring body, that is the Governing Council, and the state consultations have increased. There is no power to allocate funds and does not have the power to impose policies. So majorly because of these two major features that have come in with the NITIAayog's induction, is NITIAayog known mostly to be as a toothless body. On those lines, the other issues or drawbacks I would like to discuss here is that the current planning that is going on with all the bodies is highly centralized, while ideally the planning of an economy needs to be highly decentralized, being done from the nascent stages of an economy. And the second one is neither Planning Commission nor NITIAayog are constitutional bodies. And going ahead, as I told you, because of its centralized nature of planning, it often fails to understand the ground realities. And by ground realities, I mean here by having unrealistic data on poverty line and etc. And going upon the political lines here, coalition politics always affects the planning in an economy, because it is divided, and the coming to a unison of opinion taken for the welfare of the economy is always with a lot of hassles that delays the bureaucratic process. And next is again the major issue that I have discussed in the issues that are plaguing the economy, that is overpopulation. Planning for a country consisting of 125 crore diverse population is not very easy. And again, planning for limited resources and limited funds available is also a very big hurdle. And coming to the overall problems with let it be Planning Commission or NITIAayog, is that there is a lack of visionary leadership in giving futuristic policies and achievable goals, and there is also this lack of technological expertise. There's no technological intrusion happening within the platforms, and there is also this lack of proper monetary mechanism, which leads to, no matter how good, how achievable a target and a scheme and the allocation of funds is for a country, if the monetary mechanism to check the implementation of a plan is not in place, the plan goes to waste. That is where Planning Commission was severely criticized for this one point, for following that one size fits for all policy, where it used to come up with a plan and apply the plan likewise to all the states, irrespective of the state-wise requirements that they might be having. While let me explain to you this better with an example, where Kerala as a state has almost 100% literacy, where Bihar has literacy for around 60%. And this is where, despite the glaring difference or the glaring literacy gap, NITIAayog has come up with state-specific allocation of funds depending upon the socio-economic conditions, the state of literacy, how much allocation of fund has to go for which scheme as per literacy, where as I've told you, Kerala doesn't need a lot of fund for uplifting of the literacy among people, while Bihar very much needs. On these lines, NITIAayog has come up with this concept of cooperative and competitive federalism, which majorly means that it is going ahead with the allocation of funds depending on the performance of the states. Now, this always induces the states to perform better, to get a bigger share of the funds that have been allocated. And this gauging of the performance of the states is done through various indices launched by NITIAayog, such as the Health Index, the School Education Performance Index, the Water Management Composite Index, the Waste Management Indexes, and etc. Now, to understand planning with NITIAayog, it is also very important to understand the problems specifically associated with NITIAayog. As we have mentioned the drawbacks of the planning commissions in general, the problems mentioned here, such as these being not constitutional bodies, being centralized, not understanding the ground reality, overpopulation, resources, these are all likewise applied to NITIAayog as well. While one major problem is that the dismantling of the planning commission has happened without consulting of the states. Now, this has been the complaint by various powerful chief ministers of states likewise, where Modi has taken this arbitrary decision of dismantling without considering even with the National Development Council or states. And all the states' major point here is that this undermines the cooperative federalism on which the NITIAayog has come into form. So, when understanding the planning with NITIAayog, the cons can be that it has happened without the consultation of the states, that is about dismantling of planning commission. And the second drawback can be that the UTs are being presented by the governors and not the chief ministers. Now, this again severely undermines the aspect of federalism. as chief ministers are the ones that are democratically elected by the people of that state, representing the opinions of the state, while governors are centrally appointed. And last but not the least, since the fund allocation again happens with the performance of a state, though it induces the competitive federalism among state, as I have just mentioned, it also so that there might be a drawback that the fund allocation to welfares, like the welfare schemes, the drawback might be that the fund allocation to certain welfare schemes might get affected due to certain political reasons and etc. While this being so, NITIAayog, nevertheless, the NITIAayog's CEO Amitabh Kant has always been in news for initiating new and challenging policies. Many initiatives that are known to you by the face of our Prime Minister is the creativity of NITIAayog, such as Digital India, that is aiming to gap the digital divide within India, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which has got global recognition with addressing one of the key problems related to tourism, investments, infrastructure and etc., maintaining cleanliness overall, and agricultural reforms, which is much needed to improve the balance of payments, and skill development, which induces the human resource utilization in a better way, introduced through many schemes and etc. We also have many health related schemes going on, such as the Ayushman Bharat, which is again technology oriented and is aiding quite a lot of deal. Now this has been an inclusion because of the current pandemic situation. Nevertheless, before concluding the video, I would like to also leave you with the way ahead with the current drawbacks with the NITIAayog and planning in the country, and how the government is moving forward towards gapping these problems. Now the way forward is, in a recent research paper, Kelkar suggested the setting up of NITIAayog 2.0. And this would majorly have financial powers as a part of efforts to address the regional imbalances. As discussed throughout, that two of the major problems are that NITIAayog doesn't have the power to allocate funds and it cannot impose policies. The government is making baby steps in the direction to address that, where NITIAayog is also open to the idea of having a role in fund allocation to states for developmental expenditure, and would like to discuss this matter with the 15th Finance Commission. So next is the role of the 15th Finance Commission, and if it is going to allow the fund allocation of the states by the NITIAayog. Last and not the least is again a suggestion made by Kelkar, where the vice chairman of the NITIAayog is to be made a permanent invitee to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. And this is being made to increase the inclusiveness given to the NITIAayog in the planning of the nation. Hoping that this discussion about relating to the planning and also the issues related to planning in India has been of great use to you all. I look forward to hearing from you about your comments, opinions, or any requests about other topics to be taken up in the video series of Demystifying Economy. This is Neha signing off for today. Thank you.